starting with the refuge. Okay, so United States Congress passed the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge Act in 2001, which transferred the buffer zone around the former industrial area to the Department of Interior from the Department of Energy to be managed as a wildlife refuge by Fish and Wildlife. So that was congressional law in 2001, and the actual transfer happened in 2007. After the cleanup was over, I think the industrial area or the site was declared, cleaned up in October 2006, I think it was, and then the transfer happened. So Fish and Wildlife has been managing that green area for over a decade. They began to give guided public tours in the fall of 2015. So not very many people have been on the grounds yet. So I think I don't know how often they do it. It used to be like maybe once a month, maybe now it's up to once a week, but you have to call them and make a reservation and so on. Well, as I think Bonnie mentioned in the introduction, we had those Fish and Wildlife sharing sessions last summer where it was a one-way sharing from Fish and Wildlife to the public of what they're planning to do. And what they're planning to do is they're planning to construct trails in the refuge, and they're planning to build a visitor center in the refuge, both of which will imply disturbance of contaminated soil. And they're planning to open the refuge to public access on existing roads and so on inside the site in September of this year, September 15th. And of course, the public access and trail use will expose people to contamination. Alicia, could you go back to that big picture slide for a second, please? So I'll show you. I didn't have time to put this in. Fish and Wildlife has published a picture of where the trails will go, and the Rocky Mountain Greenway Trail will enter the plant site right at about the old East Gate entrance, a little up from there along Indiana and up, right there. And it'll come down towards Candelas, and then it'll go across towards section 16. Well, that little piece of the refuge on the east side, right between Indiana Street and the Superfund site, south of the Eastgate Road, that's one of the most contaminated places out there, because that's where the wind blew the soil from the 903 pad into the buffer zone. And again, it hasn't been cleaned up. I wouldn't be surprised if that's where that 1,000 times background sample is, somewhere in there. Well, the trail is going to cut right through there.
And Randy, what is the 903 pad for those who don't know?
The 903 pad, from everything I've read, is generally regarded as the biggest source of contamination there. For those of you who don't know, it was a field. It used to be called the 903 area. It was a field where Dow Chemical put 3,200 55-gallon drums of plutonium-contaminated oil out in the field, starting in 1958. And they did it for a decade, so they accumulated all these drums out there, and the drums corroded. And the plutonium-contaminated oil leaked out into the soil. And then they had a cleanup project in 68 or 69, and they pumped the remaining oil out of the drums out there into new drums and put away. And then they took away all the remaining corroded drums that were out there, and then they burned the vegetation and they road graded the field and put the asphalt cap over it. It became known as the 903 pad. But for a decade or more, the wind was blowing all that stuff to the east. And that's why this little strip of land just west of Indiana Street, just south of the Eastgate Road, it's actually called the Wind-Blown Area, and it's highly contaminated. And the Rocky Mountain Greenway Trail will go right through there. And whoever builds the trail will be exposed, and people who use the trail could be exposed. So now, Alicia, if you could flip ahead to Drake Panzer's wonderful photograph. Right there. So Drake Panzer, son of Elizabeth Panzer, took this photo on July 4th of this year from the Stanley Lake parking lot at 86th and Sim Street, looking west-northwest at the refuge. And you can see this dust devil out here. that was only about 20 or 25 miles an hour of wind. And that dust could contain, and in my opinion probably does contain, particles of plutonium oxide. And I've done the math and vetted it with a PhD analytical chemist to conclude that if you inhale one particle of plutonium oxide dust, let's say it happened to be a perfect cube of size 10 microns on each side, that's about 1/6 the width of a human hair. If you inhale just one of those, and CDPHE says respirable dust is in the size range 3 microns to 10 microns. So if you inhale just one of those, you would get about 500 billion plutonium atoms into your lungs, and they would emit alpha radiation at a rate of about 1 emission every 3 seconds. That's for just one. So I should probably check my math. It might have even been more than that. I didn't bring my notes. But my point is, one unlucky breath is all it takes, in my opinion. That's my hypothesis. Can't prove it right now, but if you were in the middle of that dust storm and you took a deep breath, you're really playing some roulette. Okay, so that's kind of some background on the refuge. If you go to the next slide. So the current events related to the refuge, Elisa. Oh, thanks. Okay. So what you're seeing in the news lately is Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center et al. Versus United States Fish and Wildlife Service et al. This was a case that was filed back in April or May. There's a group of about 6 organizations that are the plaintiffs in this case, and Department of Transportation is also a defendant. And the complaint in the case is just that Fish and Wildlife follow existing laws that are already on the books. Fish and Wildlife rearranged the trail layout in the refuge area without doing any additional environmental analysis, which is required according to law. And that's the complaint. These plaintiffs are just trying to get Fish and Wildlife to follow the law. And the Plaintiffs' Council filed a motion requesting a preliminary injunction so that the court would bar the Fish and Wildlife Service from opening the refuge in September 15th until the case can play out and a decision be made about whether or not fish needs to do the studies that the plaintiffs say are required. So there was a hearing on this motion last Tuesday. Elizabeth and I and others were witnesses, and the ruling on that motion is expected anytime. It could still come this week, it could come next week, and it'll be dramatic when it happens. It was really hard to tell at the end of the day which way the judge was leaning. He really grilled the defense attorneys hard, and he also grilled the plaintiffs' attorneys hard in closing arguments, and just pretty difficult to tell which way he was leaning. But the plaintiffs had some awesome witnesses. And I'm going to go to my notes on those for a second. There was a witness named John Barton, who was a former employee at Rocky Flats. He worked there for 21 years,